Yeah.
Hello, everyone who happens to be watching on Facebook Live right now. As you know, I'm Derek from Marching Health, your friendly neighborhood athletic trainer, and I'm here with Samia Mooney, who is a
Fitness
dance
extraordinaire.
extraordinaire. That's right, dance and fitness extraordinaire. So instead of me trying to rattle off your resume, I'm sure you can do a better job. So why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us where you've been, what you've been doing.
Sure, sure. Hello, everyone out there watching and hopefully watching later. My name is Samia. I am currently living in Indianapolis, Indiana. I studied kinesiology and contemporary dance at Indiana University, which was an awesome combo, and we'll get into that a little later. But I'm originally from the Bay Area, California, where I spent a good chunk of my life with the Santa Clara Vanguard performing and teaching there. And throughout the last, how old am I? Yeah, throughout the last 15 plus years, I've been in the health and fitness industry. Really, I just was an athlete in high school and I've had a love for health and fitness, and that sort of melded together with my drum corps love and that like active lifestyle, and then color guard in that world. So now I'm currently running the dance department at Avon High School, and that is a super, super fun venture and a career path that I did not think I wouldn't see myself going down that route, but it's been a pleasant surprise, and I'm really, really, really lucky and thankful to be there. And actually, you'll appreciate this, Derek, at Avon, excuse me, it's a dance department and we're in the performing arts department. And so we're hanging out with the orchestra and band and piano and theater and choir. And sometimes we collaborate. And so we have this really awesome concert in the fall where the dance department and the orchestra department combine, and we dance to their orchestration. And it's a full concert, just dance and orchestra. So it's not only, are we lucky to have our full department there, but we are lucky enough to collaborate with our friends and fellow educators. Yeah.
That sounds really cool. I love that idea of combining all the different departments for that sort of collaborative performance. That is the coolest thing I've ever heard of. I love it.
Well, and like if you've been around band, which you have for a long time, part of
Mhm.
the fun, part of the joy of it for these kids is just being around their friends and interacting. And band camp is tolerable because you get to do it with your friends, right? And so just giving our students a chance to interact with each other, and they're not just confined to being in the dance studio with me and everyone else, but they get to see what the rest of their peers are doing. And sometimes you get dancers who are musicians or musicians who are dancers, which is really cool, because then you
Mhm.
get to highlight that it's neat. Also,
Oh
one
yeah.
more thing, it's not like I'm branding myself because hello, it's public high school. You can't go back, sorry. But we are offering a new course this fall. It's called the Dancers Facility that Miss Hinshaw, who was there prior to me, started, but she was never able to see it through. But it's a non-performance course for it's a complimentary course for soccer players, swimmers, athletes, dancers who want to focus on mobility or stamina or motor learning. So it's awesome. It's like right in line with me.
Oh, that's awesome. Are you teaching that class?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, that's
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah.
That sounds so cool.
Right.
And you get to do all the cool stuff. This is great. I feel like I have all these questions planned, but now I have all these other questions you've just like
Get done.
made arise in my mind. Oh, I'm,
You
I'm
know
sure
who's
we'll get to
watching?
them.
I gotta tell you, my friend Ryan Tiscarino is watching.
Oh, cool. I'm
Ryan.
not. I'm still new to this, so I'm not 100% sure how to tell. But
Well, okay,
hey,
here's, I
man.
think if your friends are watching, it shows you. So,
Mm,
and also Joshua Tyler. Okay, so we got a couple of friends watching. Okay, cool. Well, we can get to our questions if you want, because I'm not sure they'll ask
absolutely.
anything, but they are seasoned veterans in the dance and color guard world. So
Okay.
they find this.
We should
Um,
get them on sometime. They sound like pretty
actually,
cool
yes,
folks.
you should absolutely, you should, yeah.
Okay, we'll line that up. Well, before we get into the questions I had prepared, there was one thing I want to circle back to that you mentioned. You said that when you were in college, in addition to studying kinesiology and dance, you were an athlete. Do you mean you were an athlete like as far as dance, or did you also do like a sport?
No, no. I mean, I've been an okay, I'm just like, I'm not like an Olympic athlete, of course not. But no, I've been an athlete in athletics, that from the get go. And that is really what that was the platform that got me into drum corps. You know, when I saw the color, I'm circling back around, your circle around, but when I saw the color guard in high school, out in the quad doing crunches, I thought they were like a fitness group. And so I was like, who are you? You know, can I join? And they were like, absolutely, we're the color guard. Here's a flag. But still, you know, the fulfillment of the physical lifestyle was what did it for me. But in college, no, I was full-time dance department in the contemporary dance department. And the degree is contemporary study of contemporary dance and kinesiology areas of
Yeah, that's
study.
really cool.
Yeah.
So like, am I getting this straight that you actually started, because most people, what happens, at least what happened with me, most people that I know, is they do, like they're band nerds, they find drum corps, and then that leads them to an interest in athletics, and then they get into athletics that way.
Yeah.
Did you sort of happen the opposite direction where you were an
I'm the reverse
athlete?
of that. I'm the reverse for sure. I was like my dad literally, I was a tennis player since I could pick up a racket. Like I have pictures of my mom knitting on the tennis courts pregnant with me. So tennis, swimming, soccer, you name it. But my dad literally would try to bribe me. The first year that I joined marching, I think I joined marching band my sophomore year of high school. And my dad was like, if you don't do this marching band thing, I will buy you the cutest tennis, all the tennis clothes you want, all the cutest shoes and socks and hair ties and dresses and you name it. And I was like, sorry, I really think I want to try to like get good at this color guard thing.
And the
But yeah,
rest is history.
the rest is history, but I'm thankful that I'm able to meld the two together. You know, like I'm really
Yeah.
thankful, and I'm thankful, you know, and just to like put this out there real quick, because I think you are all really deserving of this. It's so important and it's needed, and it's so wonderful that the marching activity, band, drum corps, WGI, indoor, all of it is able to have a team like marching health and athletic trainers and physical trainers and doctors. Like it's so wonderful that it's happening now, but we're all super thankful for you guys. So provides more opportunity and more sharing of the knowledge anyways.
Oh yeah, I mean, we're happy to do it. This is like the work that I've done, what little work that I have done professionally, like with drum corps, has been some of the most rewarding work ever. So much fun to work with performing athletes, this marching band, drum corps, WGI groups. It's so cool. So we're happy to do it. And yeah, shout out to all the other folks you mentioned in there, all over the place, doing great work. We're going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now you
Yeah.
said we talked about how you majored in kinesiology,
Mhm.
talked about how you and dance, contemporary dance. So my first question, now that we're 20 minutes in, might as well get to the first question.
Sorry.
Just good conversations. This is how they go. So how did I'm interested in how as you were going through that education, how your kinesiology material sort of impacted how you viewed dance and vice versa, like how your training in dance influenced how you thought about kinesiology. I know it's kind of a big question, but I
Yeah.
am
I'll
curious.
write it down. That's good. Yeah. So, okay. So, you know, when you are trying to, let's just say like master a skill, like a golf swing, for example, um, you you're probably not trying to, maybe when you start, you're trying to emulate what you see. So you're trying to copy the swing of someone that you've seen on television or in front of you or a coach. But if you were to only physically just watch and copy the mechanics visually, you would only get so far. So once you finally understand and you're shown and you're taught and you feel kinesthetically the mechanics of a proper golf swing, you're more likely to achieve success, right? Or a higher
Mhm.
percentage of success. So physically just understanding, having the knowledge and the depth of knowledge of understanding how the body works, number one, is just a complete game changer. I don't, you could say the same thing for marching or marching technique, but when you understand the mechanics of the leg and the hip and the swing through and your range of motion, you're just more likely to be a more successful marcher, right? Or to be able to progress quickly, right? So for me, having that knowledge and understanding of the physical body, the anatomy, the motor skills, the limits um, in my teaching is super helpful, because then I can just pass that on to my students, and having them understand, you know, themselves, understand their bodies, and be more in touch and in tune with their physical bodies, and and how to pull themselves out of a place that may be dangerous, or how to push forward, or knowing when to stop before injury is important, because it makes them responsible, number one, for themselves, right? Because I'm not in their brain telling them when to push too hard or when to sit out, but it makes them responsible for their own bodies. But it just helps push and progress individuals or groups forward. So as far as teaching, I find that I'm able to explain things literally, and then it takes sort of the imagery out of it. And if the imagery is needed, I could always go back to explaining imagery for people that are visual learners. So that's one with teaching. With dance training, when you have a somatic approach to dance, tied in with kinesiology and your kinesthetic awareness, it's really a lot about combining or melding understanding how the body works physically with how you're relating and taking cues off of that to either change your dance pattern, or to go to a different place, or to change a routine, or to learn a new skill or something like that. So I know that's kind of like a bunch of like stuff that I
You
just spit
use the
out.
word somatic in there. That's like a $10 word right there. Somatic means like of the body, right?
I wish this was
Yeah.
like Facebook Live Jeopardy extra point. Um,
Yeah, if you caught that one, yes, that makes sense. Though. Like you have, because of your education, you have you actually can put sort of a name to certain sensations that you have. You understand a little bit of like what the limitations are,
yeah,
what you're capable of, to a
yeah.
little more intimately than somebody without that education might.
Right. And you know, also you could maybe say the same, you can kind of relate it this way, like, excuse me. Let me relate to like color guard, for example, maybe not dance yet, but for color guard, if you, let's say you spin saber, if you completely understand how your saber relates to your body at all times, and you have that kinesthetic awareness of where your weight is and what your weight is with this equipment's weight. It could be a saber, it could be a mellophone, it could be a bass drum. Your rate of success is just going to be higher. And then on the flip side of that, if you want to progress and you want to learn how to do some dance move or skill, or circular breathing and marching and doing this and dancing at the same time or something like that, just being able to break it down into smaller subsections of, okay, this is what I know my lungs need to do. This is what I know I need to do when I prep for my breath. I know how to think ahead. You're just better set up to manage your tasks
Mm-hmm.
simultaneously, which I think it's how you elevate as a performer, right?
Oh yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah, I was
yeah.
just thinking of that. This is slightly unrelated, but like you were describing like this somatic sort of sense, and I was thinking about how I recently started training in Jiu-Jitsu, which is like, if you don't know,
Awesome.
it's like a martial art. It has to do with like grappling and like chokes and joint locks and that sort of thing. And I remember like learning this move called the Americana, that is
Yeah.
essentially, it's an attempt to dislocate somebody's shoulder if you're doing it properly. And like I was in, school, athletic training school, and I was like, oh, I know exactly like what the mechanism is behind this. So I kind of already knew, I had a sort of head start on everybody else, because I knew like what direction I was trying to push it, like what
Yeah.
force I was supposed to apply. And like
Mm-hmm.
that's a little different from dance. You're not trying to pop anybody's shoulders out, hopefully, but that I can sort of make that connection there. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah.
And
And
you
you
have
can,
that sort of, yeah. Go ahead.
it's sort of like massage therapy, or anyone who's really in that field. Like if you have a physical map of the body and the layout, you understand, you can visualize where your muscles and how your muscles work in conjunction with other muscles, or with your joints, or against those joints, or ones that you can watch some. For the longest time, when I was like starting to teach drum corps, I could not stop watching people's gait. I could not stop watching members walk
Mm-hmm.
to the food truck or to the field or wherever, because I was just analyzing everyone's gait. And I was like, that's why maybe he marches like this, or he's having to adjust his marching technique or his bell angle here because his upper body posture is like this to match like the trumpet line or something. But also,
Yeah.
just last thing on that question about like kinesiology, it's it's allowed me to stay curious, and it's allowed me to still find things to discover, or to discover things that I like studying and want to know more about, like in our field and other fields. It doesn't really matter, but yeah, it's
Well, yeah,
allowed me to be curious.
it's a really rich field, and there's like this intersection between like dance and the marching arts and exercise science, sports medicine, like that sort of intersection. It's like it's a very new intersection. There's not a whole lot of research out there, especially when you compare it to, traditional sports, like the mountains
Yeah,
of research that's been done on football and
right,
basketball and baseball. And
right.
so like it's really there really is like a frontier scientifically, which sounds very cool, but it's true. Like
Yeah.
there's so much to study. And so you've got like from that unique vantage point you have in the middle of there that I guess we both kind of have. Um, so you have this special insight, I think, into what the physical demands are
Hmm.
that color guarded and dance performers are under. Like what is being demanded of them to perform. And
Yeah.
so I'm actually wondering, like, what are some of those demands that might some people might find surprising? Like we all know you got to be flexible. We all know you got to be like powerful. Are there other things that might not be obvious that
Totally.
you found?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are probably like maybe two or three big ones, and I don't necessarily think that maybe in the past they are areas that we take in. And I'm saying we as a collective take into consideration with maybe not spring training, but like pre-training or prepping for drum corps.
Hmm.
I think one of them is weak ankles. I think
Hmm.
when you're asking a dancer or someone in the color guard to perform choreography that they would traditionally perform in a studio or in on a stage space. It's the same technique. We're not adjusting the technique because it's on a football field, whereas marching technique is made because it's been on a football field. So I think when you're doing those repetitive movements, even just jazz running, going into releve, going into an arabesque, turning, jumping, repetitively jumping. I think that ankle weakness is a big one. And I think just our population in general has weak ankles, weaker
Right.
than they could have. The amount of students that roll their ankles at pronate or supinate it's unreal.
Hmm.
Um, but I think weak ankles is one. I think overactive glutes or tight hips is probably, and they're not in order. I think overactive glutes or tight hips is probably number one, just as you carry into the season and you get like at the end of spring training and we're doing better of building in downtime and cool down time now, but 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I don't know how much. I mean, I know we didn't have any 15
Yeah.
plus years ago. Um, but as you go into those last days of spring training, not having that downtime to stretch or to do any soft tissue release on overactive glutes or tight hips just from the repetitive marching and learning like drill. I think that's a
Hmm.
big one. Um,
Hmm.
I think
That
those
makes
two.
sense. I want to go back to the ankle thing
Go back to
because
it. Oh,
I mean it makes perfect sense. Like anybody who's done drum corps knows that ankle sprains happen,
yeah.
and it seems like for most people it seems like, oh, that's just like a fluke thing. It's going to happen. Nothing you can do to prevent it.
Mhm.
But you know, and I know that there are ways that you can reduce your risk of that, and one of them is by having very strong ankles. And
Mhm.
I think I mean, that to me, that's I know what that means, but not everybody knows. Like, what does it mean to have stronger ankles? Is it a matter of having stronger ligaments or like muscles, or what do you mean by that?
Lateral. Well, you want to have stronger lateral muscles, right?
Yeah.
And then
So
what
like,
do? Go
yeah.
ahead.
So I was thinking. So yeah, the muscles specifically is what I was thinking of. At least I don't know what I'm assuming you're thinking the same thing I am.
Yeah.
Because like the idea is like the ankles are they're absorbing a whole lot of the force. I mean, there's a reason why your Achilles tendon is so gigantic. It's because it's doing a whole lot of work. In fact,
Mhm.
that's part of the reason why we're bipedal. Like the reason why we have that thing is because it requires that big springy action, and so
Mhm.
there's a lot of force going through ankles. And if your muscles, so you have a bunch of tissues that are absorbing those forces. You have your bones doing their work. You have ligaments that are absorbing a little bit of wobble. You have muscles, and the idea is you want those active tissues, so the muscles, to do as much of the work of absorbing as they possibly can to take more of the load off of the non-active tissues, the inert tissues, so the ligaments, the cartilage, the bone. And so if somebody's doesn't have the right strength and endurance in those ankle muscles. So you're saying like the peroneals and
Yeah.
like even the intrinsic muscles of the foot, like those ones on the bottom of your foot. If
Yep.
those aren't doing their job, then they're gonna slack and they're gonna slough off that work to the bones, to the ligaments, and that's when you start getting sore. That's when you start getting too much wobble in that foot, and then you step in a hole, and instead of like stabilizing reflexively, you
Right.
roll it, and now you've got a sprained ankle, and you're
Right.
out for a week, and
Mhm.
nobody's happy. So,
Right. But it's a great point because there is so much you can do preventatively to strengthen those
mhm,
muscles or strengthen your feet or just tangent, but like proper footwear. I think we are so much more on top of the game of providing information on proper footwear, especially now that we have professional you guys working in our field. But someone who has high arches versus someone who has flat feet are going to
mhm.
need different support. And then we're asking them to do the same marching technique, right? So how do how do you inform the students? But yeah, so
Yeah,
so weak ankles,
yeah.
um, overactive glutes, which I'm
Okay.
talking maybe strictly like in color guard or dancer world. I think it's a common one, especially because uh, with color guard we are super welcoming of all body types and
Mhm,
sizes and compositions, and sometimes that doesn't mean that everyone has that beautiful turnout that you see dancers have on stage, right? I don't have
mhm,
great turnout, I don't have great flexibility, but I need to know when I'm in a place where I need downtime and recovery and soft tissue work, in order to not prevent 7 to 10 plus days until the next free day or laundry day, or until I can see a PT or someone,
mhm.
to make sure I can do my job, quote unquote, right, as a performer.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that you brought up like the differences in physical composition and how that can make a big difference. Because we like to think like very fitness tends to be kind of cookie cutter. It's
Mhm.
like, okay, this like especially like people who say like this is the right way to do a squat, for instance. Like
Right.
this is the right way, and if you're doing it, like it has to be this many degrees out, and your toes are, and a lot of like what that misses is the fact that there is a lot of variation in anatomy. So you're talking about turnout, and I remember reading an article about this actually once because I was curious about turnout, and like apparently it's in order to get like that perfect ballet turnout that you see, it's like perfect 180 degrees. You have to have, I don't know if you say like abnormal, but it's just like outside normal, typically normative
And
ranges of
yeah.
femoral retroversion. So like your
Mhm.
hip socket actually turns out a little more,
Mhm.
which is like, which is
Which
actually like a risk factor for certain things, but
yeah.
also makes you, yeah, it makes it way easier to achieve that turnout. So like I never even thought of that as a thing, but like it really does. It makes a big difference in how people stand, what positions are comfortable to them,
Right.
and like what injuries they're at risk for, but also what like what activities and movements they're more suited to.
Right.
It's just it goes a lot deeper. Like you could talk all
Yes.
day about it.
Oh yeah, I know. So we're like geeking out on this stuff, and I love it because totally, like someone who, okay, for example, like I go back to that. So the rotation of your femoral head and the acetabulum, right?
Hmm.
If you don't know the structure of your pelvis and your hips, how do you know how far you're pushing? How do you know when you're pushing too far until you cause injury, right? Unless you're getting your hips x-rayed and you have a perfect like idea of what your skeletal body looks like, you just don't know until you try to get there, right? For example,
Yeah.
I had pretty narrow hips, and I tried to force my rotation when I was in college when I was dancing, and my little acetabulum has a little one side is much deeper. It goes over the head of the femur a lot more, and the other side is a
Hmm.
lot shallower. So I tried to force my rotation evenly on both sides, and I chipped the side of the edge of my acetabulum.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, it's
So
not
for people
terrible,
following along,
but it's
for
good to
people
know.
following along at home, sorry if I cut you off
Go
there.
for it. Go for
The
it.
delay. But for people following along at home, you probably noticed it said acetabulum. I love that we're nerding out. I'm just going to translate. So acetabulum is the socket. So if you think of your hip as a ball and socket joint, right? So here's the ball, here's the socket. The acetabulum is kind of the socket, right? And the femoral head is the ball. And so this, your hip sort of moves like this. The ball and socket joint, that's why it can go like all around circles. It's very mobile. Same with your shoulder, whereas the elbow is like a hinge, right? Just so everybody's following along. And so what you were describing there, and there's a lot of variation in the population, is that yours, you said one of your hips had a little deeper socket.
Yeah.
And so yeah, and we call that, sometimes that can lead to like impingements. We call that a pincer mechanism. And that's actually very true. Is like you see, especially in dancers, it's very common for them to have that overdevelopment because they've been, a lot of dancers kind of like you were doing, try to force that range of motion when it's just physically not there. Like it's bone. You're not going to stretch a bone into being more flexible. And so they keep hammering on it. And as you stress bone, Wolf's Law, everybody, as you stress bone, that just makes it build more. If you've ever heard of bone spurs, that's exactly what that is. You stress the bone over and over again, it's going to lay down more because your body thinks, oh, I guess we need more protection here. So you end up actually making it worse, and it's very common. So that's a very good thing. Like I think for instructors, it's helpful for them to know, people who are working with dancers. They're like, if you're working with a dancer and they're complaining of hip pain as they're trying to work into these positions of extreme flexion or external rotation or whatever it might be, that if they're describing pain, that's not a sign that they should be pushing further into that. You might be doing more harm than good. So
Yeah.
that's a little nugget for everybody watching. Thank you for bringing that up. That's a very important point.
Yeah, but that brings up another really great point that, in the culture, in our culture of drum corps and marching band and these, 12-hour, 13-hour days or whatever we have, to understand the severity of when someone, which I think we do this now, but the severity of when someone says that they're having pain or think they might be injured, that we as educators and professionals need to set aside whatever thoughts or feelings we may have had about possibly that person in the past of, oh, they maybe have a tendency to sit out a lot, or maybe they don't have the stamina, so they've been sitting out. But if they're saying that they're in pain, we have a responsibility to check it out or have them
Yeah,
checked out. Do you know what I mean? Let the professionals
yeah,
do that. But I think we're much
absolutely.
better at that now.
Oh, absolutely. I remember back in my day, I marched '06 to 11, and
Wow.
all of our techs, they really cared about us. All our instructors, they really cared about our well-being, but they just didn't have the education to know a lot of this stuff. And but no fault of their own. But I think as like in athletic training school, they teach us one of the I don't know if they put it this succinctly, but kind of one of the axioms that we have is pain is always real. If somebody says they're in pain, you trust that. Like you never want to go down the route of like, oh, are they making this up or are they exaggerating it? Because like you'll never know for sure if they're making it up. It makes no sense to like assume that they are. That's ridiculous. And B, pain oftentimes doesn't need a physical cause. Pain happens in the brain. Sometimes there's a physical origin of it. Sometimes there's not. I won't get deep into pain science. Maybe someday I will. We can talk about that in another conversation. But the upside of it is, you, like the whole, in a nutshell, pain is always real. If somebody says they're in pain, believe them.
Yeah.
And if you're an instructor, you should always be safe. Refer them to somebody, a medical professional of some kind. It's always better to be safe than sorry.
It's true.
Yeah.
It is.
I didn't expect the conversation to go that direction, but I'm glad that it did.
Good. Yeah, good. Spread that good word.
Yeah. And so with when it comes to we'll talk about this when it comes to approaching how you train to prevent those sorts of injuries and also just to maximize performance. I'm wondering what you do is, and I'm thinking in terms of like the off season as
Mhm.
well as like in the day right before like warming up for a day of rehearsal. Like how do you sort of approach preparing physically to do something like color guard or dance?
Yeah, yeah. So with the off season, I mean, they're just like when we talked about body composition, different types of individuals needing different routines or information, right? Or attention. Your off season is going to look different, may look different person to person. But it's always a good idea to have a good flexibility program in your practice. So I think that is like first and foremost, only because the amount of like excessive repetitive motions that we put our muscle groups through during the summer, like that is inevitable with just repetition and the amount of reps and the long days. So having a good flexibility routine or regime in your regiment, in your practice, something that you, yeah, right now, regime, regimen. It's the Corona. It's the,
Right.
yeah, but no, but
Yes.
not, but having something that you as a performer, or as a member, feel comfortable with, like doing on your own before lights out, before you go to bed, or doing, even just taking 5 minutes to know how to stretch your body and know what your body needs before you get on the bus to go to the next city or the next stadium. So I think being responsible with your flexibility and staying consistent on top of that is one. Other off-season practices, you have to build muscle. You have to, even as dancers, like even in the color guard, we are so, in the color guard world, in the dance world, there is already, I'm going to preface everything with it's getting better, especially because social media and because of some of the great influences we have in social media, and with like Misty Copeland and having, dancers that are strong and have muscle, not muscle tone, but like have muscle and working muscles. It is so important to have muscle before you start the season, because you're going to lose fat and you're going to lose muscle, but how much muscle will you lose before you can be, before you're in a place where you're susceptible to injury? And I'm not going to go into details of like, they all have their programs and their lifting things they like to do and their, but I think that's hugely important.
Like building strength. Like I think a lot of people, I know I thought this way for a long time, think of flexibility and strength as like two diametrically opposed forces. Like you can't be strong and flexible at the same time. What do you think about that?
Right. You absolutely can. I mean, you were just talking about BJJ, that you're getting into BJJ, and those guys and gals are super muscular, and they're fast, and they have incredible stamina on the mat for hours, and and they're flexible. You have to be flexible to get in those binds and those holds, but they can absolutely coexist. I think it's just a stigma that you can either bro it out and be super muscular and then you like can't fit into your clothes, or you can squat and that's it, and you look great but you can't lift your arms up, right? There's one. Or the opposite side of that is that you're super flexible, as in more in the dance world, not so much in the marching world, but the dance, what we've seen, history has shown us, is that you're more flexible as a dancer and you create longer, more quote unquote beautiful lines if you have less muscle tone. So
Yeah.
so you can have both, but you have to work at both. And obviously as you build muscle, you have to keep up with your flexibility. And if you're one of those lucky people who was born flexible and has more lax ligaments, then great for you. I'm super envious, but build muscle in the right way to support your joints, right?
Absolutely.
You could elaborate on that stuff if you want.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, an interesting different way of thinking about this that I don't remember where I first encountered this. A lot of people think of like, okay, you're lifting and that's like tightening things up, and stretching is loosening things up, and that's like half true. But like a better way to look at it is that your body adapts specifically to what you throw at it. And that goes for what types of movements, how intense those movements are, and the ranges of motion you're doing them in. So like one of the things I learned, if I have an athlete and I'm trying to improve their range of motion in hip extension, let's say they've got really tight hip flexors because they've been sitting at a chair all day, I'm trying to open up their hip extension. If I just stretch the hip flexors, I'm only getting halfway there, because all I've done is sort of shut off the overactive muscle. In order for the body as a whole to really take that and make that range of motion available, you have to actually move in that range. So like I would pair a hip flexor stretch with like a hip bridge. That's a really popular pairing because you turn off the overactive muscle, you activate the underactive one, in this case, the hip extensors, hamstrings, and glutes for anatomy nerds. And when your body actually uses that range of motion actively, doing a strength move, not just passively stretching, that's where it's like hitting save. It's like Control S, or Command S for you Mac people,
Yeah. Yeah.
Command S, then you're actually saved. And so the way that flexibility and strength training fits into that is that if you're just stretching, you're only getting half of it. You should be moving actively through that range of motion, which is why, and somebody actually mentioned Michael Nash in the comments, yoga. Yeah, do you do yoga a little bit, right? Just a little
Yeah.
bit.
I think I'm doing a Bluecoats yoga class this Saturday, actually.
All right, yeah.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that because it's a slightly off topic, but I think it's very applicable.
Okay, so to tie into what you're saying about not only hitting your range of motion, but moving through your range of motion, and what you're actually doing is you're creating new patterns, right, from your brain to your muscle, and you're creating synapses and new areas for your body to literally and physically memorize that range of motion, right? And you're making it, I guess I could just say, more accessible to get there, right?
Yeah.
But something that's great about yoga is that yoga is in the best way so repetitive, taking you through. It doesn't just take you through your move, your pose or posture once, but it takes you through it 2, 3, 4, 5 plus more times, depending on what kind of practice you have. So you're getting the flexibility with the repetition and range of motion, which is just, it's a win-win. The thing with, I just play devil's advocate too much. I'm sorry. Like the flip side of that, and one of the downfalls of social media is that you get yogis or folks that want to practice yoga because they want to just get into the cool poses. They want to get into the visually stunning thing that they're attracted to, which is like awesome because that is stirring some creativity and some exploration. But to each their own. If you do it and you get there safely without injury, awesome. But also there are so many benefits from a stretching, a mobility, and like a range of motion program that could come from that.
Yeah. Well, I've done a few yoga classes in my time. One of the things that I like about it is that you're not just stretching, you're actually like, it can be really physically challenging because you're like actively like getting into certain poses and holding them, and it requires like, it's strength. You're working on strength, you're working on endurance while you're working on mobility, and that makes it all not just flexibility but usable flexibility. Like you can use that range of motion now,
plus your core and your all those isometric holds. So it's good. It's great for balance too, which you can tie back into ankle strength. Back to that conversation too.
Yeah, a lot of people think of like their physical capacity, whether that's strength, flexibility, agility, all in terms of hardware. Like it's all about, oh, my muscles, how big are they? How stretchable are they? But like that's really only half the picture. You also have the software portion, the neuromuscular stuff, which is a whole field of study. Y'all should read some books on it. It's great. But essentially, I think of it as hardware and software. You need the hardware, but you're not going anywhere without the software. And the nice, like when you're approaching strength training, flexibility, you should be thinking about both. I'm not just physically stretching out my muscles. I'm actually trying to use that range of motion so my brain knows how to use the hardware that I'm putting in it. So,
yeah, I'm going to steal that.
Think of that.
Hey, there was one more part of your question about either strength and conditioning or just how you prepare or warm-ups for students, right?
Oh yeah, like I'm wondering about like specific warm-ups, like let's just say, just to bring it down to micro level, like before rehearsal, you want to do a warm-up with your color guard students. Like how do you know what to do? Where do you start?
Okay, so I think it's super, super important, just like we talked about, when you have a student who says that they're in pain or they think they might have an injury, to acknowledge that and not just wave it off. I think it's really important to understand and talk to your students and to communicate in the morning with how they're feeling. And eventually, when you get with a group of athletes or performers that want to be better and do better and progress, they're not going to give you the runaround every morning with, oh, can we just stretch, or can we just like shavasana today? They're not going to do it because they want to be better and they're driven, right? So I think having good rapport and having establishing good communication in the morning, seeing what they need and what they want is important. That being said, I do think it's important to take time to have mornings where you're just working on range of motion, and just like we talked about, range of motion and flexibility. I think it's always a good idea to work core in some capacity because of the amount of time you're going to be standing during the day. Just and more you do it, the more tendency you have to relax those abs and go into that, spill forward. And so I think core work in the morning is always great. If you can only do one thing, if you can only do one or two things and you have like 5 minutes and for whatever reason you got in late to the housing site and you got to get up and go for it, I would say do a couple planks, do a forward fold, release and stretch out your back, low back hamstrings, and then work in some shoulder mobility if you need it. Just a few things.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Like you have to, I think of it as like I like the body responds to demands you throw at it. And so if you're about to throw, a show at it, you need to make sure that it's ready for those things. And one of those things is range of motion. So like what do color guard folks need to do a whole lot of, like what positions do they need to get into? You have to prepare them for that. If you're going to ask them to put their foot behind their head, but you haven't prepared them for that, you're not going to get very much success there. And I like the idea of the core being prioritized, because we were talking about software. Speaking in those terms, one interesting thing is that if we've all heard probably one way or another that like the core is where your movement originates from. And that's true in a number of ways. It's sort of like a transition area between your upper and lower body, but it's a lot of where your brain's, I'm going to put it this way, sense of safety comes from. Like I know you're very familiar with this. I'm trying to put it into very simple terms instead of using all the fancy stuff. But your brain doesn't like to be in threatening positions, and if it feels like it's in a threatened position, it'll just lock things up. It'll freeze degrees of freedom, is what you say in dynamic systems theory. So it locks things up. And so if you're coming out on the field and you're all loosey-goosey and your spine doesn't feel stable and you try and do some wacky stuff, your body's going to be like, nope, and just lock it right up. And that's the last thing you want. So I love that idea of incorporating this a little bit of core. It's not necessarily to like get a burn going. Like you're not trying to do, hey guys, let's do 300 sit-ups. You're trying to activate those muscles so they can stabilize the spine. Because if the spine is stable, then your brain is like, okay, the spine's at least okay. We're going to be okay. Now we can, if you have, here's an idea. Proximal stability leads to distal mobility. Strong foundation, lots of mobility available out there. So there's a little nugget as well.
Also ties into somatics and kinesthetics.
So. Ooh, kinesthetics. Ooh, man, lots of $5 words. We're just throwing them around here. I'm going to have to pull up a dictionary.
And I know we didn't talk, we're talking strictly physicality with, your morning warm up, or, if you're short on time or if you're long on time, but we're talking only in physical sense, but also, it's a great idea just to connect to your breath and just find your focus for whatever you're about to do. But even more so, if you put all three of those things together, if you can connect to your breath, engage your core, and maybe just like do a quick test, like a quick little, let me just close my eyes and stand on one foot for a second and just like center myself so that I know that my brain body connection is there and I'm good to go out on the field. Mostly what I say for is mostly to have good response or reaction time is what I like to do it for, because I just don't ever want to get injured and I don't want my students to get injured. So if they have good response time and they can be on top of it and change on a dime, then in a lot of ways that is more valuable to me than like if they've, really stretched their hamstrings completely,
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Like not just physically ready for the demands, but also mentally ready for the demands. And like you mentioned like standing on one foot is sort of like quick check, are all systems go. I like that idea. I never thought of that as like having a sort of like a way to sort of quick check, like, am I ready to go out in the field? Like my thing would normally be like, okay, I'm going to do a few squats. I'm going to try like crawling. Crawling is big for me, like doing like a all
bear
fours crawl. Yeah, like a bear crawl or something. Cause then like you can feel if your hips are all wobbly, if like your core isn't stabilizing. Or like, I love the standing on one foot. I'm going to use that. It's like, because that'll give you a really quick idea. If you know that usually I can stand on one foot with my eyes closed and it's fine, but today I'm a little wobbly. It's like, maybe I'm not done warming up. Maybe I need to keep working before I'm ready to go out there and start tossing rifles around.
Maybe those stabilizer muscles just aren't ready. Yeah.
Yeah.
You do it in the food line when you're waiting to eat breakfast.
Yeah. Indeed. That's a good idea. I'm gonna write that one down on my invisible notebook.
That's
Invisible
right. I
notebook.
know I have like sticky notes here. They're blank.
We're recording this. I'll go back and watch it later. It's fine. Well, we're running low on time, but I do want a quick touch on this subject
Okay.
because it's, it's what's topical. Y'all knew it was coming. We have to talk about it. The pandemic that's happening.
Mhm.
Um, I don't need to reiterate. We're all living it day by day. We're all in slightly different circumstances, whether you're still working, if you're an essential worker, or if you're still in school. I know a lot of people are, or whether you're like me, sort of in a weird in between place. Um, it definitely affects our ability to get together and create and to practice our crafts.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering for you personally, like how has all this affected your ability to practice your craft and connect with your students?
Yeah. So that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. Um, it not having the normalcy of being in a physical space with students or with other people, but more specifically with the students, it's really difficult. Um, and I didn't expect it to be this difficult on my end. Um, but I know if it's hard for me, it's probably 5, 10 times harder for them because this is a point I did want to bring up. I can do it now. We talk about sometimes we have students who going to the band hall or going to the dance studio or coming in for choir. Sometimes that sometimes they need that space more than we think. Um, and so just being able to have an open line of communication with my students has been really rewarding and fulfilling, and just checking in sometimes and sending a message to everyone and just saying, hey, just miss you guys, just wanted to let you know, like, I miss seeing your faces, I miss you coming over to my desk in the morning, and I'll send a little individual message to a couple of people like, hey, how's everything going with this and that? I remember you talking about this the last week that we were in class together. How's that going? Just letting them know that I'm still here for support if they need it has been really fulfilling. But, also on the flip side of that, like, students may need your program more than you think, but we may need sometimes as teachers or educators or just responsible adults, sometimes going to work to see my kids is what I crave and need during the week more than I
Mm-hmm.
thought. So it's been really eye-opening, but physically speaking, as far as like getting what we usually get done in the studio done via video, it's completely not the same. So we're just we're trying to have two-dimensional interaction and feedback, and really as a whole, I'm just trying to make sure that the kids feel supported, because I think their mental and emotional well-being is more important at this point. They're all their grades are going to be what they're going to be, and I think there will be some forgiveness there with the school systems in the state of Indiana, at least. But making sure that our students come out safe and healthy on the other side, I think, is more of the focus right
Yeah.
now. Yeah.
Yeah, that is the priority. Yeah, it seems like sounds like you've been sending a lot of emails, Facebook messages, having Zoom chats. That's
Yeah.
very popular.
Yeah, and we've had Zoom dance classes, we've had guest artists come in, we're working on a choreo project right now. This is just like at the high school level, but we're trying to make the best of the situation. It's just and also, at the same time, I'm not trying to throw out assignments just for the sake of keeping them busy, because it's not really practicing, the standards that we're trying to get out. But
Hmm.
yeah, but I do
Yeah.
miss them.
Yeah. I I'm not actively involved in teaching. I do have one private trumpet student, and I
Oh,
get to see him via Zoom. That's really fun. It's honestly one of the best parts of my week.
that's what I'm saying. Like, like sometimes I'll just have like a quick 20-minute Zoom session with some students. I'm like, you know what? That was really great.
Oh
Did
yeah.
they do everything? Did so and so like completely like not do that the way I intended? Yes, but it's okay, because you know what? They logged in and they stood up and they got on the ground, they rolled around and they tried to figure it out.
Well,
Yeah.
that's great. So, like for I'm curious. This could, that probably gonna be the last question for
Okay.
everybody. So along those lines, working with students, I know a lot of teachers are in this position where like suddenly they're trying to teach things like I have my partner here, she's a band director. She's trying to find a way to like still, teach kids music, make them better, like still get as close to the in-person education as possible given the circumstances. So what are some things that you've been having your students do to try and like be as productive as possible here, help them sort of connect and create? Like what have you tried that's been working pretty well?
Yeah. Okay. Well, like everyone, I'm not sure how it is for your partner and her students, but like TikTok is so prevalent. It's so prevalent in my life. Not that I'm on it, but I know that my students are on it. So trying to give them assignments that are short and succinct and that are achievable, strictly for the reward process of it, just to not to give them points that don't mean anything, but for them to have that satisfaction of like, I'm doing my assignment, I completed it, it was achievable, I was able to keep up with this plus 6 other online classes. So trying to keep, just trying to keep everything succinct and small and compact. And we started off easy and kind of done this. And now that it's the last 2 weeks of school where, I gave them their assignments well beforehand, but I'm trying to relate to them. Their first assignment was to send me a video message. And this was inspired by my mom. Literally one day, my mom, she was visiting and she's also a teacher. And I was just telling her, I was like, Mom, I have some students and they always come to my desk right before, like right when I'm in the middle of my 3-minute, let me plan, or not plan, but let me like get everything together for this next class. And they always come in and they're always excited to see me. And they always want to tell me like what their weekend was like or how their day was or something cool that happened to them. And so they're always like, Miss Mooney, guess what? And it's every day and it never fails. It's always the same girls that come over. And I found myself missing that. And so their first assignment was to send me a video saying, Miss Mooney, guess what? And to tell me something exciting or positive, or just for the most part positive, that has happened because of the shelter in place and the social distancing. And a lot of, and everyone turned it in. And a lot of these kids were just, this was, granted now, this was back in March. So they had been spending more time with their family and they had been spending more time with, like their animals, and they had been gardening, or they had, been able to go outside, or they've been able to make coffee at home. And so, just trying to keep it relatable. We obviously have dance classes and do all those things, but trying to relate to them and keep them happy and healthy for when this is all over.
Absolutely. And still trying to build those parts, like build on those parts of, dance generally that is so valuable to a lot of students, which is the connection that students have between each other and between the student and teacher. Right. I know that that's also the case in the band world. I like the idea, like sort of approaching it from like creating connection first instead of just like approaching it like we need to have them turning in all these assignments so we can grade things and get them a score. Trying to create that connection, because that's what that's what they do it for. A lot of them is that it's all about that connection.
I mean, you can take the kid, maybe the lowest chair clarinet, but like he's still going to be in the band, because it's about connecting with these kids and giving them a place and an opportunity to fulfill something. So totally. I like it. Yeah.
It's all about connection.
It is, which is why we're doing this. Oh my God, full circle, brought it around.
We did it. We did
it. We did it. Okay. Okay, we have some people watching. Do they have any questions, or do we just want to sign off?
Well, I guess. My original plan was for us to talk for like 35 minutes and then have a bunch of Q&A, but like we went for like an hour, which is great.
You can do whatever you want. Doesn't matter to me. If we want to call it, we can call it, and totally great.
Well, let's call it for now. Next time, maybe we'll pick a slightly more narrower, a slightly more narrow sort of a topic, and we can leave some time for Q&A. But hey, if anybody does have any other questions that you want to ask, I guess you can contact us at Marching Health. I know. What are some ways that people can find you, Samia? Should you wish to be found?
If you, You know what? My Facebook is private, but you can send me a Facebook message and I'll get to it if you have questions there, or you can find me on Instagram if you like. I'm not one to push like I don't even know what my Instagram handle is, so I think my name's just my name up there. But
Okay.
yeah, either
All
place is
right.
fine. Or via
Okay.
Marching
Well,
Health. Someone can ask you via Marching Health and forward it to me.
yeah.
That's just fine.
If you have any questions and you don't want to, take the time to search up Samia Mooney on Instagram, send it to us at Marching Health. We'll forward the question and we'll make sure it gets answered. So thank you so very much for taking time out of your evening to talk to us today. It was
Super.
great information. I learned a bunch of stuff today, so that was great.
Me too.
So,
Thank you, Derek. Good to see you.
all right.
I wish
Thanks
we were
everybody for tuning in.
moving into spring training right now, but
Oh yeah, that was supposed to be. Oh, it hurts my heart.
I
It hurts
know.
my heart.
I know.
But we'll be back someday.
That's
Marching
right.
on, 2021.
Yeah.
It's like 17 months away or whatever.
Got a
Well,
clock. You got a countdown
however
calendar.
many months away it is. Well, thanks again, and
Thank
thanks
you.
everybody for tuning in on Facebook. We'll see you next time.